Only probably because the English weren't as good at bribing people as they needed to be, because Cromwell wasn't really a player by this stage. I think they were a bit naive about what they needed to do. And so, yes, you've got in Wolsey a great European figure, and I sort of fell in love with him in a way. Once he began to speak, I was entranced, and I felt that all I had to do was write it down, and I couldn't get him off the page. I was going to sweep him out of the book in about 50 pages. But then I began to realise what an enormous force he was, not just in England, but in Cromwell's life, and that I had to play out Wolsey's story for full value if we were to understand where Cromwell came from and what drove him.
Because you depict Cromwell's bleak and grim upbringing in Putney and then around Europe, and then he's learning from Wolsey. He learns almost everything from Wolsey. His philosophy is you just put your shirt on Wolsey. And two of the main players at this time, called the Duke of Norfolk. The wonderful portrait you have of the Duke of Norfolk sometimes makes me think of the Duke of Edinburgh. You have he says to Cromwell at one stage, "Cromwell, you don't talk to women, do you?" I mean, what would be the topic? How much fun did you have with Norfolk?
Well, you know, the bit about talking to women I took almost directly from his own words when Norfolk's daughter Mary married Henry Fitzroy, Henry VIII's illegitimate son, and she was very quickly widowed. And when she was widowed, then a question arose of her status, her dowry, what was to be done with her. And Norfolk says in a letter, "She's a very good wit. I never commoned, that is, talked with her before in my life." You know, this is his daughter now around 20, and they've never had a conversation. The Duke of Norfolk is a wonderful, grisly military martinet, and he was also intensely superstitious, and in my book he clanks when he walks because he's hung about with such a quantity of holy medals and relics. But, you know, having said that, although he was conservative in religion, when the big land grab came, when the monastery was dissolved, Norfolk was there, first in the queue, more.
So you've got all these characters and all these events happening, and you use the present tense, as you've mentioned. Did you find it easy to keep it all the balls juggling? Did you run away with yourself?
It's really like a sort of process of kind of industrial process of heaving huge blocks of facts around. It's you know, people think of the writer pen poised, waiting for inspiration, but this is more, more like a feat of organisation than anything. You've got to get your structure in place. You're asking the reader to remember a great many facts and a great many characters. Without that, you can't tell the story. And so you have to have it, I think, very, very well organised, so that even if people don't grasp every point, they feel they're in safe hands and they feel that you're guiding them. So, no, it's taken me 5 years, which I think was the least amount of time in which it could have been written. It wasn't an easy process at all, but having said that, I did what I wanted to do. It came out as I had envisaged it.
And at the heart, of course, is King Henry, he who must be obeyed, and everyone is in his shadow and trying to keep him happy. I mean, that is their job. David Starkey recently said to me that I had to understand that King Henry was like the David Beckham of his day. This getting Mandelson and Beckham, it's all getting a bit confusing. And so Anne Boleyn's posh and all that. What about Henry? What did you feel?
Well, my Henry, by the time we join him, he's slightly over the hill. Still keeping up the jousting, but he probably shouldn't. Well, I wouldn't say a man in decline, but middle age set in early in those days. And as Cromwell says, few of us by 40 are not carrying injuries, whether they're emotional or physical. I think that's still true. Henry has come to this point in his life where he's been married to Catherine for 18 years. They don't have a son, and mortality is nagging at him very hard. And I try to explain to my reader, to put it across to my reader, how urgent Henry's desire for an heir is. It's not some kind of vanity project. The fact is, we're only a few years removed from the Wars of the Roses. The Wars of the Roses are over, but they didn't know that. Unless Henry has an heir in place, unless he can contrive a smooth handover after his death, this Tudor dynasty, which is still very new, is possibly doomed, and the great lords are there to scrap over the throne, as they were doing before his father came on the scene. And his bid for an heir is a bid to stabilise the situation, to make sure that the country doesn't go back to the horrors of civil war. I think we probably, for some reason, we regard the Wars of the Roses as rather quaint, and rather aristocratic and removed from the ordinary people, but they were not. They slaughtered thousands and thousands of people. There were extremely cruel battles, economic dislocation, and the whole thing ran on for years. And so no one in England wanted a return to civil war. And I think this is why Cromwell, when he gained power, his ultimate aim was to stabilise the realm, to keep the king's peace, and to enforce law and order. It was a tall order in those days.
Absolutely. And at the core of the book, of course, is the conflict between Thomas More and Cromwell. And you've sort of turned on its head Robert Bolt's A Man for All Seasons, which some of us might colour what we thought of Tudor times. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes, well, I think it is true that because it's a wonderful play and made a wonderful film, it has exercised a sort of stranglehold over our imagination for a couple of generations, but it has actually not very good history. I, of course, in a novel can do far more than Robert Bolt could do with a couple of hours on the stage. But his picture of Thomas More as a 1960s liberal with inherent